What if the story everyone believed about It Ends With Us had been turned upside down? For months, the public conversation painted a clear picture. Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds were widely portrayed as the people protecting the film's message, while Justin Baldoni was cast as the obstacle. But a recent interview with editor Jacqueline, an experienced Hollywood editor who has also worked on projects for Taylor Swift, offers a very different perspective. Her role on the film wasn't ordinary. According to Jacqueline, Justin Baldoni specifically brought her onto It Ends With Us because she is a survivor of domestic violence. He wanted someone whose personal experience could help shape the movie's most emotionally difficult scenes with honesty and authenticity, especially the moments depicting abuse. That decision makes what happened next especially striking. Jacqueline says she dedicated herself to the film's climactic confrontation, drawing from painful memories of her own past. She explained that the sequence originally included longer, more psychologically intense moments designed to reflect how survivors actually experience abuse, fragmented memories, emotional disorientation, and lingering trauma. When she finished assembling that version, she screened it for fellow editors, who, according to her account, responded with a standing ovation. It wasn't just positive feedback, it was recognition from seasoned professionals who believed they had witnessed something deeply powerful. But by the time the movie reached theaters, Jacqueline says that version had disappeared. She recalled sitting in the audience and realizing the sequence had been dramatically altered. The scene had been shortened, many of the flashback elements were removed, and the emotional intensity she had carefully built was no longer there. Instead, she says, the confrontation had been reshaped into something far less graphic and emotionally complex. According to Jacqueline, that's where the story becomes much more complicated than the public originally understood. The debate didn't end with the missing footage. According to Jacqueline, the explanation for why those edits happened raises even bigger questions. She pointed to internal communications that later became public, saying they appeared to show that editing notes were coming from Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds. As she described it, the revisions weren't limited to minor creative suggestions. They reportedly included requests that reshaped major moments in the film, including the removal of flashbacks that had been central to her original version of the climactic abuse sequence. If that's an accurate reflection of what happened, Jacqueline believes it completely changes how people should view the controversy. She said the most surprising part wasn't simply that her work had been altered, it was who she believes made the call. According to her account, Ryan Reynolds concluded that her version of the scene wasn't realistic enough. That's the detail that stunned many viewers after the interview was released, because Reynolds held no directing credit on the project, while Jacqueline had been hired specifically for her lived experience as a domestic violence survivor. For Jacqueline, this wasn't just another editing disagreement. She explained that every creative decision in that sequence came from memories she had spent years trying to move beyond. The pacing, the fragmented flashbacks, and the emotional confusion weren't dramatic inventions. They were her attempt to portray trauma the way she remembered experiencing it. From her perspective, those choices weren't added for artistic flair. They were meant to make the film feel emotionally truthful for other survivors watching it. She also argued that the situation created a sharp contrast between what audiences were hearing publicly and what she says unfolded behind the scenes. While Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds were widely presented as advocates for women's stories and the film's integrity, Jacqueline suggested the reality inside the editing room looked very different. In her view, the version of the domestic violence storyline shaped by someone who had actually lived through that experience was gradually stripped away during post-production. As Jacqueline continued telling her story, the conversation shifted beyond a single editing decision. She began describing what it was actually like working with Justin Baldoni over the years, and why she felt compelled to speak publicly despite the personal risk. According to Jacqueline, her professional relationship with Baldoni stretches back nearly a decade. During that time, she says she edited projects for him, spent time with his family, and came to know him well outside of a single production. She insisted that the kindness audiences often associate with him isn't something reserved for cameras. In her experience, it's how he consistently treated the people around him. She even shared a personal example. After experiencing a devastating tragedy several years ago, Jacqueline said Baldoni reached out with a simple message: "You're not alone." She explained that the gesture wasn't unusual for him. In fact, she admitted that when they first began working together, She questioned whether his compassionate personality was simply another Hollywood image. Over time, however, she says those doubts disappeared as she watched him interact with colleagues project after project. Her description directly challenges the public narrative that emerged around the production. Rather than portraying Baldoni as someone who created a toxic working environment, Jacqueline described an editor's room where collaboration was encouraged. She said he wasn't known for attacking coworkers behind their backs or allowing ego to dominate creative discussions. Instead, she remembered someone who treated filmmaking as a team effort and welcomed input throughout the editing process. She also pointed to something she believes carries significant weight in Hollywood. Freelance editors aren't tied to long-term contracts with a single filmmaker. If a director develops a reputation for treating people poorly, experienced freelancers usually have the freedom to work elsewhere. Jacqueline suggested that her willingness to continue collaborating with Baldoni over roughly 10 years reflected her own experience working alongside him. Not a relationship built out of obligation. For Jacqueline, that's one reason she felt her perspective mattered. She wasn't promoting a film, launching a new project, or benefiting financially from speaking out. On the contrary, she acknowledged that publicly defending someone involved in such a high-profile controversy could potentially create professional consequences. As a freelancer whose career depends on industry relationships, she understood the risks, but chose to share her experience anyway because, in her view, remaining silent had become more difficult than telling the story as she remembered it. Even with those concerns, Jacqueline says speaking publicly was never part of her plan. She described herself as someone who prefers working behind the scenes, not in front of cameras. According to her, everything changed after she left a brief comment defending Justin Baldoni beneath a Perez Hilton video. What she expected to be an unnoticed reply suddenly exploded online, drawing attention from major media outlets, including the Daily Mail. Instead of feeling excited, she says her immediate reaction was fear. Her first instinct, she recalled, was to contact Baldoni, not to celebrate the attention, but to apologize. Jacqueline worried that her spontaneous comment might complicate his ongoing legal situation or create additional problems for him. She said the pressure surrounding the case had become so overwhelming that even telling the truth felt risky. That fear, she explained, was one of the biggest reasons she remained silent for so long. Before agreeing to appear on camera, she tried a different approach. Jacqueline said she privately spoke with publicist Andy Signore, simply wanting someone to know that, in her experience, Baldoni was a good person. At that stage, she had no intention of giving interviews or becoming part of the public debate. She only wanted to share what she believed had actually happened behind the scenes. Months passed before she finally agreed to tell her story publicly. Even then, it wasn't easy. Jacqueline revealed that her first interview had to be abandoned because she was so nervous that the footage couldn't be used. She described struggling to speak naturally, overwhelmed by anxiety and uncertainty. Only after additional evidence surfaced in the months that followed did she feel prepared enough to return and record the interview again. Looking back, she believes that first failed recording says more than any polished interview ever could. According to Jacqueline, she wasn't afraid that her memories were inaccurate. She says she knew exactly what she had witnessed inside the editing process. What frightened her was the possibility of confronting powerful legal teams, experienced public relations professionals, and influential figures within Hollywood. In her view, those realities created an atmosphere where speaking publicly carried genuine professional consequences. Yet despite those fears, she ultimately chose to return, sit in front of the camera once more, and share her account because, she says, remaining silent had become even harder than speaking out. As more of Jacqueline's interview surfaced, another contrast began to emerge. One that centered on how each side handled the conflict behind closed doors. When Jacqueline asked Justin Baldoni what was happening during the growing tension over the film, she says he never launched into personal attacks. Instead, he simply explained that It Ends With Us meant a great deal to Blake Lively and that she viewed the project as an important career opportunity. According to Jacqueline, he acknowledged that Blake wanted significant creative input, but he avoided insulting her or turning the disagreement into something personal. She believes that stands in sharp contrast to messages that later became public. Jacqueline referenced text exchanges reportedly linked to Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds' side, in which Justin Baldoni was allegedly described with insults such as clown and doofus. If authentic, She argues those conversations reveal a much more confrontational tone than the one she personally witnessed from Baldoni throughout the editing process. Her comments also revisit one of the biggest talking points surrounding the film: the idea of the female gaze. Throughout the controversy, critics argued that Justin Baldoni, as a male director, couldn't fully understand a story centered on domestic violence from a woman's perspective. But Jacqueline says that criticism overlooks an important fact. According to her, Baldoni intentionally hired her because he recognized that lived female experience was essential to portraying those scenes authentically. In other words, she says he actively sought out the perspective that critics later claimed was missing. Jacqueline believes the real irony came afterward. She argues that the very editor brought in to provide that authentic perspective ultimately saw her most personal work significantly altered. In her view, the person chosen to help shape the film through the lens of lived experience ended up having those contributions reduced during post-production, even while the public narrative continued emphasizing the importance of a female perspective. More broadly, Jacqueline suggested that terms like female gaze can lose their meaning when they're used primarily as public messaging rather than creative practice. She stressed that the concept itself remains valuable, but said the event she witnessed inside the editing room left her questioning whether the principle was ultimately reflected in the finished film. The interview didn't stop with the editing room. Jacqueline also addressed another issue that had been circulating online for months: claims surrounding Justin Baldoni's personal faith. According to Jacqueline, she found many of those accusations deeply unfair. Although she isn't a member of the Baha'i faith herself, she explained that she's been around the community through her long friendship with Baldoni and never witnessed anything resembling the disturbing image that had been portrayed in some online discussions. Instead, she described it as a religion centered on unity, compassion, and respect for others, adding that she never experienced pressure to participate or convert. She argued that turning someone's religious beliefs into a source of suspicion can become an effective way to damage their public reputation. In her opinion, unfamiliar beliefs are sometimes presented as something mysterious or threatening, making it easier to cast doubt on a person's character. But based on her own experience working closely with Baldoni over many years, she said his faith was never controversial in practice and didn't resemble the descriptions that had been circulating publicly. Jacqueline then revealed another challenge she faced before deciding to speak publicly. She said she reached out to numerous people who had also worked on the film, hoping others would be willing to share their own experiences. According to her, she believed multiple voices would carry more credibility than one interview alone. But those conversations rarely went anywhere. As she tells it, most people chose to remain silent. Jacqueline said some feared being blacklisted within the industry. Others were concerned about becoming entangled in legal disputes or confronting the influence of powerful public figures. Whatever their individual reasons, she says very few people were prepared to step into such a high-profile controversy, leaving her as one of the only post-production professionals willing to publicly defend Baldoni's character. That silence, she believes, speaks volumes about how Hollywood often operates. Jacqueline reflected on the standing ovation she says her original edit received from fellow editors. According to her, a room full of experienced professionals witnessed work they believed was emotionally honest and artistically significant. Yet despite that reaction, almost no one publicly discussed it for nearly a year. In her view, the absence of public support wasn't necessarily proof that people disagreed. It may have reflected how difficult it can be for industry professionals to challenge an already established public narrative. By the end of Jacqueline's interview, she argued that several of the most widely accepted narratives surrounding It Ends With Us no longer matched what she says she witnessed firsthand. She believes the idea that Blake Lively was simply protecting the film's artistic integrity becomes much harder to reconcile with her account of the climactic abuse sequence. According to Jacqueline, the version she created, built from her own experience as a survivor and praised by fellow editors, was significantly reduced before audiences ever saw it. She also questioned another common assumption. Publicly, Ryan Reynolds was often viewed as a supportive husband offering creative input behind the scenes. But Jacqueline pointed to reported text messages that, in her view, suggest his involvement may have extended much further into editorial decisions than many people realized. If those communications accurately reflect the process, she believes they raise important questions about who was ultimately shaping the film's final message. At the same time, she said her own experiences don't align with the image that developed around Justin Baldoni. Throughout the interview, Jacqueline consistently described him as collaborative, respectful, and willing to listen to the people around him. She contrasted that experience with the public perception that portrayed him as difficult to work with, arguing that the two versions simply don't match the director she spent years working beside. Looking ahead, Jacqueline expressed one hope above all others. She said she wants audiences to someday see Justin Baldoni's original director's cut. More specifically, she hopes the version containing the complete climactic sequence, the one she assembled using her own lived experience and the version she says received a standing ovation from fellow editors, will eventually be released so viewers can judge it for themselves. Whether that ever happens remains uncertain. Jacqueline acknowledged that legal disputes and industry decisions could ultimately determine whether the original cut is ever made public. But she believes that as long as it still exists, the conversation surrounding It Ends With Us isn't over. In her view, the unseen footage represents an important piece of the story. One that, if audiences ever have the opportunity to watch it, could reshape how many people understand the film's production and the controversy that followed. There's one final point Jacqueline returns to, and in her view, it reaches far beyond a single dispute over a movie. She believes the It Ends With Us controversy illustrates how quickly public perception can be shaped once a dominant narrative takes hold. Headlines, social media, and celebrity influence can reinforce one version of events long before the people working behind the scenes ever have a chance to speak. According to Jacqueline, that's why her interview wasn't simply about defending one person. It was about documenting what she says she personally witnessed during the film's production. Throughout her account, Jacqueline never claims to have every answer. Instead, she offers the perspective of someone who spent years working with Justin Baldoni, someone who says she was hired because of her lived experience as a survivor, and someone who watched her most personal work evolve into something very different before the film reached audiences. Those experiences, she argues, deserve to be considered alongside the public statements, leaked messages, and competing narratives that have surrounded the project. For Jacqueline, the unanswered question remains the same. She hopes viewers will eventually have the opportunity to see the original director's cut. The version she says contained the full emotional impact of the climactic sequence. According to her, that footage still exists, and if it is ever released, audiences will finally be able to compare both versions for themselves rather than relying solely on second-hand accounts. Until then, the debate is likely to continue. Different people involved with the film have presented sharply different accounts of what happened behind the scenes, and legal proceedings remain ongoing. Jacqueline's interview doesn't settle every question, but it does add another first-hand perspective to a story that has already generated intense public discussion. Ultimately, she believes history will judge the work itself. If the original cut ever becomes available, viewers will be able to decide which version best serves the story, and whether the film that reached theaters reflects the vision that was first created in the editing room.